Capitalism plays a big part in the society we reside in. Capitalism is defined as an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. Since the United States is based off of capitalism, over the years, among other things, prisons have gone from a state-run entity to a private enterprise. In order for prison owners to make the most amount of profit from their property, it requires stuffing as many bodies into prisons as possible. Therefore, the demand for new inmates will always be high. According to Wayne Calabrese, president of Walkenhut Corrections, a private prison firm, he states that public-private prison partnerships can lead to reduction of construction costs by 25 to 40%. He also claims that they will reduce operational costs, which accounts for more than 80% of a prison's life cycle, by 10 to 20%. However, this major argument that supports privatizations of prisons isn't necessarily true. Private prisons constantly claim that they are cost-effective, but that is still being disputed since there is no hard evidence that proves that statement to be correct. According to Jenny Gainsborough, a director of the Washington Office of Penal Reform International, much of the research that supports the cost-effective argument for privately owned prisons have been produced by researchers who are either funded by the industry or in favor of privatization. She states that with more than 2 million people behind bars and the highest rate of incarceration in the world, the U.S. certainly does not need companies with financial interests in further growth influencing our justice policies. A major argument against private prison companies like Corrections Corporations of America is that although they have always presented themselves as both cheaper and better than traditional publicly owned prisons staffed by state employees, the mayhem and the murders at the prisons are tremendous. For example, at a prison in Youngstown, Ohio, the prison ended up paying $1.6 million to prisoners to settle a lawsuit to a series of wrongful death civil suits and numerous disturbances and escapes. The authors of the 2003 Grassroots Leadership Report documented in detail a staggering range of failures of the prison's management. The list included failure to provide adequate medical care to prisoners, failure to control violence in its prisons, substandard conditions that have resulted in prisoner protests and uprisings, criminal activity on the part of some CCA employees, including the sale of illegal drugs to prisoners and escapes. Many of the company's problems are blamed on its labor policies. Since prisons are very labor-intensive, the only way they can sell themselves to the government as a cheaper option than public prisons while still making a profit is by using as few staff as possible, paying them as little as possible, and not spending much on training. The treatment and the justice that the inmates received is an ethical issue. Since prisons know that they have to produce the most amount of profit possible to be funded, and since the government compensates them on a per-prisoner, per-day basis, the abuse to these inmates are high. For example, if a guard knows his bonus depends on the amount of money the prison makes, he has every incentive not to write up inmates for good behavior that will get them released sooner. Also, these prisoners are tremendously exploited. The federal prison industry pays federal prisoners between 23 cents and $1.15 per hour, with the average federal prisoner making 92 cents per hour. However, these inmates only keep a fraction of their wages since approximately 80% is withheld for restitution. Thus, the average take-home wage of a federal prisoner is around 18 cents per hour. In philosophy, there are a series of moral theories that philosophers have made to guide our choices and what we ought to do. For example, Immanuel Kant discovered deontological ethics. In deontology, the belief is that the consequences of our actions do not matter, just the rightness or wrongness behind our actions themselves. From the deontologist's perspective, private prisons are morally wrong. The corporations involved in private prisons do not care about the inmates or their well-being. They are only interested in the amount of profit that they can make. There have been numerous accounts of mistreatment to inmates that have been swept under the rug and ignored until the prison faced public pressure. If the people at the top cared about the well-being of these inmates, which is their duty, then their responsiveness to issues in the prisons that arise wouldn't only have to come with media attention. There are inmates who are in jail who eventually return to society, but when they are locked up, they are not being taught how to conduct themselves when they return. In our society, prison is more of a workforce for these inmates instead of a rehabilitation facility. and they must work in order to get money for commissary. This is why people make the correlation of our mass incarceration rates, which are housing mostly Latinos and African Americans, to modern-day slavery. Once these inmates are released, the time that they serve follows them throughout the rest of their lives. This is when they are asked, have you ever been convicted of a felony on job applications, health insurance applications, business licenses, and it restricts their right to vote. Hence why most of these inmates end up right back in jail. My solution to this growing issue is to go after the major problem that is causing people to be locked up. We first have to revise some of our justice policies and attempt to fix our broken system. For example, there are overcrowding in jails from people stuck in prison for the rest of their lives due to things like the three strikes law introduced to the United States by Bill Clinton in the 1980s. We can never fix prisons with a corrupted system.